Where, you might be wondering, is my bottle of Irish Mist? Normally, I'd be waving it around in my hand right now. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. They say Ireland is a land of stories, and so too is bottle 120, Irish Mist. Where, you might be wondering, is my bottle of Irish Mist? Normally, I'd be waving it around in my hand right now. That's because normally, I try to research and record these bottle history episodes before I taste the bottles, especially since I usually gift the rest of the bottle to my guest. And that was my plan with this one, since I already had a trip to Ireland scheduled and planned to taste the bottle while I was there. But as I researched, I realized the only way I was going to untangle the multiple origin myths of Irish Mist was to get my hands on a book published by Offaly History in the town of Tullamore, the birthplace of the brand. So recording this episode had to wait until after. Thanks to that trip and the kindness of a friend, I now own a copy of the book. This meant I was finally able to get some answers to the many questions I had from my research. Because I've talked about a lot of liqueurs with mythological origin stories on My Tiny Bottles, and this one has all the rest of them beat. Irish Mist has an ever-changing series of origin myths that manage to both build on and contradict each other. And the true story is actually pretty good all on its own. Irish Mist claims, and rightfully so, to be the first commercially produced liqueur in Ireland. It got its start in 1947 at the B. Daly Distillery in Tullamore, the home of Tullamore Dew Irish whiskey. Its creation was part of the story of the rise and fall of Irish whiskey. Once the best-selling whiskey in the world, 12 million cases of it were sold worldwide in 1900. There were tons of active distilleries. But then two things happened pretty much at once. Ireland declared its independence from Britain, and the U.S. passed Prohibition. And all of a sudden, there was no one to buy their whiskey. Through the years, the small distilleries all folded, and by the 1970s, there was only one company, the Irish Distillers Group, operating only 2 distilleries on the entire island. By that time, sales were down to just 500,000 cases a year. Today, Irish whiskey is on the rise, but in the 1940s, Irish distillers were still struggling, and Desmond Williams, the head of Tullamore Dew, had excess whiskey. All the stories agree on that point. What happened next, though, is where mythology takes over from fact. In the real story, a German Jew named Fritz Hallgarten emigrated to England in 1933 and got involved in the wine and spirits business. He was making a whiskey-based liqueur called Glen Mist, but as World War II raged on, supplies of the Scotch whiskey and honey he needed were both running short. They were available in Ireland, so he began contracting with Desmond Williams to make Glen Mist for the UK market, as well as a domestic version called Irish Mist. The financial and legal story about how Irish Mist came to dominate the global market while Glen Mist faded away is exhaustively covered in charts and graphs in the Offaly History book. But it's nowhere near as interesting as the amazing myth-making about Irish Mist that was also a huge part of its success. The earliest version of that story, as printed on the first bottles of Irish Mist in 1948, claims that the liquid in the bottle was based on an ancient, long-lost recipe for heather wine. An Austrian distiller brought the recipe back home to Ireland. Why an Austrian distiller? Well, this was just post-World War II, and it was a more palatable nationality than Fritz Hallgarten's actual German origin. But since the business transaction was decidedly unsexy, how did the ancient Irish liqueur recipe get to Austria and then back to Ireland? Just wait. The words heather wine alone might have been enough to be compelling in Ireland. Known as heather ale in Scotland, the two countries have very similar tales about this mythical liquid. Famed Scottish poet Robert Louis Stevenson actually turned the myth into a poem. But in the early 1950s, Irish Mist was poised to expand to the American market, and some new myth-making was in order. For this task, Desmond Williams hired Maurice Walsh, famed Irish author of The Quiet Man, to rewrite the traditional tale of heather wine. He wrote a short story that was included on a pamphlet with every bottle of Irish Mist sold in America beginning in 1953. One of the most delightful finds in my research was a pair of letters between the two of them, where Desmond Williams is trying to get Walsh to cut his price because the story isn't even original, and Walsh's reply is, "The Saturday Evening Post pays me $1,500 for 5,000 words." The story, The Secret of the Odonshu, is quite fantastic, with warring Irish clans, a bloodthirsty chief desperate to get the recipe for heather wine, and a brave old man who's willing to sacrifice to keep the recipe safe. Check out the show notes for a link to where you can read it at mytinybottles.com. But it proved to be too complicated, so in 1956 it was time for myth number 3. Our Austrian distiller reappears, this time with an explanation. In 1691, there was a large emigration from Ireland known as the Flight of the Wild Geese. According to the story, one of the wild geese took the secret recipe for heather wine with him to Austria, where his family kept it safe until the imaginary Austrian distiller brought it back to Ireland in the 1940s. While no more believable to me, this story had legs, both metaphorically and literally, as the Irish soldier in an Austrian military uniform was immortalized in an elaborate soldier-shaped ceramic decanter that was sold in 1966. My Tiny Bottle is not, alas, a tiny ceramic soldier. Leaving aside the soldier, for the first 40 or so years of its history, Irish Mist was packaged in a squat brown glass bottle, similar in shape to Bottle 56, Benedictine. But in 1987, the company was sold, and the new owner switched up the packaging to a Waterford crystal-inspired bottle, and that's the version my grandma had. While variations on that theme lasted until 2009, my bottle is probably from the late 1980s or early 90s. Since I have already tasted it, I could tell you how it was. But no spoilers. You'll have to check out the next episode when I taste Irish Mist in Ireland with a real non-mythical Irishman. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that episode. Also, if you're not already a Patreon subscriber, go check that out. I had way too many awesome Irish Mist facts to fit in this episode, so you will find more of them there. And of course, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below or find me at My Tiny Bottles on Instagram and Facebook and at TammyLC on Blue Sky. Cheers!